Let's unravel the story. The movie begins with an elderly man named Charles arriving at an airport in Alaska with his team. A mechanic at the airport is shocked to see Charles in person, as he is a billionaire known for his intelligence and vast knowledge. While walking toward a seaplane, his assistant suggests that he should rest first, but Charles, who has a tight schedule, insists on heading straight to a filming location at the base of an Alaskan mountain. After a long flight over mountains and forests, they finally arrive at a cabin owned by Charles's friend Jones. Jones gives them a quick tour, showing them the bedrooms, kitchen, and restroom. He also warns them to be cautious, especially never to leave food out with the door open, as dangerous bears roam the area. During their stay, Charles becomes irritated as he notices his young wife, Mickey, getting closer to their photographer, Robert. That night, dressed in a revealing outfit, Mickey tells Charles how lucky she is to have a wealthy husband like him. However, Charles is suspicious, feeling that she is only with him for his money, especially since he is no longer physically young. Mickey tries to reassure him that she loves him for who he is. Their conversation is interrupted when Mickey suddenly asks Charles to make her a sandwich before bed. As he prepares it, Charles panics upon noticing the door left open and raw meat sitting out. He fears that a bear might smell it and approach. But to his surprise, it was all just a prank. It turns out that it's Charles's 65th birthday, and the team throws him a surprise celebration, complete with drinks and gifts. After the party, Jones comments that Charles is lucky to have such a beautiful and sexy wife. However, he also warns Charles to be careful, because success and wealth can always be taken away by someone else. The next morning, Mickey is having a photo shoot dressed in traditional attire. Once the session ends, Robert suddenly approaches Mickey and kisses her. Charles, who witnesses this, is visibly furious as Mickey seems delighted by Robert's attention. Not long after, Jones arrives and discusses Kodiak bears with Charles. He explains that these bears are fierce natural predators that never let go of their prey once they have locked onto them. Meanwhile, Robert and Stephen find themselves in a dilemma. A male model scheduled for the shoot has fallen ill. While thinking of a replacement, they notice a photograph in the cabin of a rugged hunter who seems like a perfect fit. Jones tells them that the hunter's name is Henna, and he lives in a cabin about 2 kilometers away. However, he also warns them that Henna might be out hunting at the moment. Despite this, Robert and Stephen come up with a plan. Suddenly, Robert invites Charles to join them on a trip to find the hunter. Mickey supports the idea, encouraging Charles to go on an adventure for once. Though skeptical, Charles is curious about their intentions and eventually agrees. During the flight, Charles, still suspicious, directly asks Robert what he thinks about him and Mickey. Robert replies that Charles is incredibly lucky. Not only is he rich, but he also has a beautiful wife. Hearing this, Charles bluntly asks, "What's your plan to kill me?" Before Robert can respond, disaster strikes. A flock of geese collides with the plane, causing severe damage. The aircraft becomes uncontrollable and ultimately crashes into a lake. As the plane sinks, Robert quickly swims to the surface, but Charles stays behind to rescue Stephen, who is trapped in his seat. Thanks to Charles's efforts and CPR, Stephen survives. In the freezing cold, Charles struggles to start a fire, but the harsh winds make it nearly impossible. With no other option, Robert is forced to use a flare. The next morning, with only one flare left, Charles insists that they must move. He explains that being stuck in a valley reduces their chances of being found by a rescue team. He encourages them to head south. Lacking a compass, Charles resourcefully makes one using available materials. Once they determine the right direction, they agree to hike toward the mountains. During their journey, Robert, still bothered by Charles's earlier words, asks what he meant about being killed. Charles directly accuses Robert and Mickey of plotting to get rid of him and take his fortune. Robert dismisses it, assuring Charles that he is overthinking. As nightfall approaches, they continue their trek deeper into the wilderness. After some time, Stephen suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach. He asked everyone to take a break, but Charles, who was in a hurry, insisted they keep moving. Not long after, Stephen was startled when he heard heavy breathing coming from the forest. Moments later, they were all shocked to see a massive Kodiak bear standing before them. They froze in fear, trying not to move so the bear wouldn't notice them. But as panic set in, they couldn't help but run. After running for some distance, they stopped, exhausted, thinking they were safe. But their relief was short-lived. The bear was still close by. They could hear its heavy footsteps and growls, so they took off again. In their desperation, they were forced to descend a steep path that led to a waterfall. Now they had to figure out a way to cross it. As they worked frantically to find a way, the bear's growls grew louder, signaling that it was getting closer. Together, they lifted a large tree trunk to use as a bridge. But as Charles was crossing, the bear did something unexpected. It shook the trunk violently, making Charles lose his balance. Luckily, Charles managed to hang on and was saved. The bear let out an angry roar before finally walking away, seemingly frustrated. However, Charles soon realized that his backpack, which contained flares and supplies, had been swept away by the river. There was nothing they could do about it, so Robert urged them to keep moving. As they walked, Robert remained hopeful, saying that help would surely come soon. After all, a missing billionaire would make headlines, and the media would be looking for him. Charles agreed, and as night approached, they decided to rest. The next morning, they resumed their journey, hoping to find a way out. After traveling for hours and descending into a valley, they were devastated to realize they had somehow ended up back where they started. Frustrated but determined not to give up, Charles asked Stephen to make a spear so they could catch fish while he went to gather firewood. Meanwhile, Robert, feeling hopeless, was reminded by Charles to stay strong and keep fighting. There was still a chance to survive. Just then, they heard Stephen scream. Rushing over, they found that he had accidentally dropped his knife while making the spear. After treating his wound, Charles told them to bury the blood-stained cloth as far away as possible to avoid attracting predators. That night, Stephen, weak and in pain, told them he would rest for a while. As the night grew colder, heavy rain began to pour. Charles, realizing the rain wouldn't stop anytime soon, looked for a better spot to take shelter. He was furious when he discovered that Robert hadn't buried the bloody cloth as instructed. The scent of blood could attract predators, and his fears soon became reality. Stephen suddenly noticed something moving in the darkness. It was the bear. It had picked up the scent of blood and was now charging straight at them. Since Stephen was too weak to run, he became the bear's primary target. Charles and Robert tried to fight off the bear, but it was too strong. Tragically, Stephen became the bear's next meal, all because of Robert's mistake. With no other choice, Charles and Robert ran aimlessly into the night. The next morning, in the freezing cold of a snowstorm, Robert, weak from hunger, asked Charles how they were going to find food. Thinking quickly, Charles, who had always been interested in survival skills, came up with a plan. He built a squirrel trap, and to their relief, it worked. They had finally caught something to eat. But just as they were celebrating, they heard a loud noise. It was a helicopter. They ran toward it, desperately trying to get its attention. Unfortunately, the rescue team didn't see them and flew away. Robert, now completely hopeless, felt like he was just waiting for death. But Charles, calm and determined, refused to give up. He encouraged Robert to keep fighting, believing that a miracle might still happen. Though skeptical at first, Robert eventually realized how shameful it was to lose hope when an older man like Charles still had the will to survive. As they continued through the snowy forest and valleys, they eventually spotted a river. Charles believed there might be salmon or some other fish they could catch. Determined to get food, he decided to craft a fishing hook while asking Robert to gather firewood. Several salmon swam near the bait, but catching them proved to be difficult. Still, Charles remained patient and focused. While Charles concentrated on his fishing, suddenly, a massive Kodiak bear appeared right in front of him. Shocked but trying to stay calm, Charles realized the bear was still tracking them. As the bear moved closer, Charles took off running into the forest, with the bear charging right behind him. Fortunately, he managed to squeeze between thick tree trunks, making it difficult for the bear to reach him. Amidst the chaos, Charles yelled for Robert to build a ring of fire to keep the bear at bay. They worked quickly and managed to set up the protective fire circle, huddling inside it. That night, they couldn't relax. The bear's heavy breathing echoed in the darkness. It was still hunting them. Feeling trapped, Robert asked what their next move was. Charles suspected that the bear was toying with them, waiting for them to grow weak before striking. With determination in his eyes, he declared, We have to kill it." At sunrise, they immediately set to work, gathering wood and devising an ancient hunting strategy. Charles was confident they could take the bear down. However, Robert, feeling doubtful and frustrated, snapped, "How are we supposed to do that?" Charles explained that they would use blood as bait and attack the bear with spears they had prepared. But before going into battle, he first boosted Robert's morale, encouraging him like a leader rallying his troops. With their plans set, they used a piece of Stephen's old cloth as bait. The bear took the bait and started moving toward them. They guided it toward a stone trap they had set up, but the trap failed. With no other choice, they ran as fast as they could. Reaching the river, they realized they had no choice but to fight the bear head-on. Using his survival skills and sharp instincts, the older but wiser Charles finally managed to kill the Kodiak bear. Robert, injured from the struggle, rushed to check on Charles. Seeing that he was unharmed, he sighed in relief. With the bear now defeated, they made a meal out of it, filling their empty stomachs while avenging Stephen's death. As a trophy, Charles kept one of the bear's claws, symbolizing their victory. They also used the bear's thick fur to craft warm coats for their survival. After eating, Charles wanted to find the right direction before continuing their journey. Using a needle from his watch, a gift from his wife, he created a makeshift compass. After traveling for some time, their exhaustion turned to hope when they discovered a small cabin, signaling that civilization was near. Upon entering, Charles noticed that the place had been abandoned for a long time. Meanwhile, Robert found a rifle, leading him to believe the cabin once belonged to hunters. Checking a map, Charles realized they could travel further by boat. He then spotted a kettle, and since it seemed to be in working condition, he suggested they have a cup of tea before heading out. A moment later, Charles noticed something strange when he found an invoice inside Robert's box. As he checked it, he was shocked to discover that Mickey had been secretly having an affair with Robert for a long time, using Charles's own money. Mickey had even bought Robert a watch as a thank you gift after their dates. Still in shock, Charles confronted Robert about the watch Mickey had given him. Realizing that Charles now knew everything, Robert reloaded his gun and admitted, "Yes, I've been seeing your wife all this time, even though I'm just a photographer." Now, fed up with the situation, Robert decided to get rid of Charles once and for all so he could have Mickey to himself and enjoy all of Charles's wealth. What a betrayal. Charles, however, calmly told Robert to step outside if he really wanted to shoot him. Once outside, Charles tried to reason with Robert and make him think rationally. But Charles was always one step ahead. He already knew about a hidden trap in the area and cleverly led Robert straight into it. Now trapped and in pain, Robert, who was filled with rage moments ago, suddenly begged Charles for help. And despite everything, Charles, being the kind-hearted man he was, decided to save Robert instead of leaving him to die. Back at the cabin, Charles quickly treated Robert's serious wound. Time passed, and Charles, using his intelligence and survival skills, carried Robert to find help. By this time, Robert, weak and ashamed, could only remain silent. Charles then decided to use a small boat to transport Robert. But as they reached the riverbank, Robert, barely holding on, realized that his life was slipping away. Holding Charles's hand, he expressed deep regret and apologized for everything he had done. Hearing Robert's words, Charles, with his forgiving nature, immediately forgave him. But he urged Robert to stay strong and hold on until help arrived. Just then, the sound of a helicopter echoed in the sky. Overwhelmed with hope, Charles frantically waved his arms, desperately trying to get the pilot's attention. And finally, the helicopter spotted them. Charles was filled with relief and happiness, but his joy was short-lived. To his horror, Robert couldn't hold on any longer. His body gave out, and he passed away before help could reach him. Time passed, and once Charles arrived back at the cabin, he was greeted by a crowd of people, including reporters. In the midst of the emotional moment, Charles silently handed Mickey the watch she had given Robert. Seeing it, Mickey was instantly filled with guilt and sadness, knowing that her secret was now exposed. The media then pressed Charles with questions, wanting to know what had happened to his companions. But Charles, holding back his emotions, simply replied, "They are gone, because they saved my life." Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.